We're here to talk about sustainability. Have you ever engaged with the ideas of sustainability, and in what capacity? As a student, which is like academics, as a researcher in design, in urban design, planning, policy, just to get a sense of where we are all at, and we can take it from there rather than necessarily going over stuff that we already know.
So we're ending the polls now.
Okay, so mostly in academics, good amount in building, design, research, urban design, and policy. Great. Right, so I want to start with the sustainability conundrum. And I call it a conundrum because there's lots and lots of different things happening, and it's difficult for us to know how to join the pieces together. But I think we all recognize that sustainability, at least as accepted today, is about three pillars. One, which is people or society. And this is about infrastructure, health, education, equality, work-life balance. A lot of indicators or a lot of measurement tools go into trying to understand how sustainability works for people. The second one is, of course, planet, which is where the entire sustainability debate started, which is it questions, are we living a life which our planet can support? And this essentially covers resources which we consume resources, or rather waste which we produce, which has to be absorbed by the planet. And of course, what we call ecosystem services, which is pollination and stuff like that, which helps agriculture, which helps give us our food. And the third pillar of sustainability is profit. Now, this, of course, relates to economics, and it often examines sort of business performances. How can you continue to get profit into the future without using up all your resources at the moment? And so the conundrum is, what is sustainability? We know that there's three different aspects to it: people, profit, planet. And often the diagram that we look at is something like this, where we can look at linkages between profit and people. If I create a profit, somebody has to be buying my goods, and therefore as a business I would be looking at people as consumers, and therefore I would do those business changes or those business policies which would target my customer base. And if my customer base is environmentally conscious, I may include some of the planet aspect into my profit, but generally I'm trying to look at how do I continue my profit. If we look at the planet aspect, ecosystem services, the ecology, we would probably be not consuming at all, or we would be wearing hair shirts and we would be having to do our own agriculture. But that's, again, going too far. It's not engaging with the ideas of profit or people. And so each of these, when we look at the sustainability conundrum as these three pillars engaged in this diagram, we find that we are always having to deal with one at the cost of the other. If we want to look for profit, we're always having to, the payoff for the people who are paying for that profit are the people and the planet. If we want to save the planet, we sort of say that, oh, we can't really have profit. And so I propose a slightly different diagram. And that diagram is something like this. We have to come up with a definition of sustainability, or an idea of sustainability, or an approach to solutions to the conundrum, which does not play profit of people or people of planet or planet of profit. It's something where these three areas can combine. So what is this question mark? We use terms like efficiency, We talk about optimization, maybe maximization, resilience. Resilience we would talk about in business terms, for example, an article recently was talking about a business proposal to the diamond merchants in Surat. If the market falls, how resilient is your business? But this is not really answering certain questions about sustainability as a whole. And then, of course, corporate speak is about management or use of renewables, recycling. We claim that offices are sustainable if they use recycled paper, or they try to reduce their amount of wastage, paper wastage. And another big term that we use to try and describe the individual systems of sustainability is green. Green, of course, is a good thing, but it's not sustainability. Green is like driving an SUV which gives you 15 kilometers to the liter instead of 10 kilometers to the liter. Sustainability is like saying, let's have a walkable city where we don't need to use a car at all. And so it seems that we are missing something in this entire debate about sustainability. And we are missing, where does this happen? The only place that we can actually try and link people, profit, and planet together is to understand that instance, that point, where we as people do what's best for us and the planet and the profit. And that can be exemplified by the fact that, say, today, cities support about 50%, just over 50% of population, but they consume 80% of the energy. They produce 80% of the greenhouse gas production and generate 70 to 80% of the economic output. And so we can see it is where people are interacting with each other and with the planet around them, which is in cities, that we have the biggest conflation of these three ideas. And this gives us a clue as to what this question mark is. Sustainability is not isolated. It's part of our daily life. Every day we take a decision whether to take a car, take a bus, take a rickshaw, use public transport, walk, buy something, not buy something. And it is those decisions, I think, where the sustainability conundrum is going to eventually be decided. And so these decisions, these choices, these interactions between these pillars are modulated by the complex network of systems we call cities, neighborhoods, and buildings. And therefore, I'm proposing a new diagram, which is people, profit, planet come together in place. And if we can understand place, we can start to examine how people and profit and planet interact with each other. And so place is where we walk. It's what we buy and sell. As architects and designers, we draw the walls, we draw the facades, we detail doors and windows, we engineer slabs and waterproofing. But that's not what our business is. Our business is the square footage we are selling. It's the white space on the paper. But we are obsessed with drawing the black space, the black bits. And so space starts to become very, very important. It is the connective tissue. It connects the most private parts of our house into the public parts of our house, into our neighborhoods, and then into our city as a larger system. And then in between cities, it connects different parts of our country, and it connects our different countries together. It is where we...
Sir, you're unfortunately muted. Could you please unmute yourself?
Can you hear me? You haven't heard anything so far?
So we missed the last 10 seconds, unfortunately.
Okay, I apologize. So let me just undo that. Perfect. So did you get... Did you get this slide where we talked about cities?
Yes, sir.
You got this? Okay,
Yes.
so our point is that to understand that people engage with each other and with the business systems, the planetary ecosystems, systems of transportation, systems of economics, systems of exchange, we engage with these things in space. And therefore, this question mark in the middle is people, profit, planet linked in place. And understanding place becomes critical to understanding people. But why place? Place is where we walk. It is what we buy and sell. We may be drawing the walls and doors and windows and slabs and waterproofing and foundations when we do buildings, but we are not selling the foundations. We are not selling the walls. We are not chosen. We don't do design because we are good at detailing walls. We do design because it is space that we are engaging with. It is the connective tissue. It connects the most private parts of our house through to the most public parts of the city. It is where we engage with others and with the city. It links people together. And so we need to ask ourselves a different question. What is the problem of space? So the problem of space was first articulated in the 50s, 60s, and 70s in the UK when the sort of rich people in London wanted to move to the suburbs, and there were a number of developers who tried to create these high-value village developments to attract this moving population. But time and time again, they failed to create a village feel, and we can see it in our townships today and in certain urban scenarios where we've got the buildings, we seem to have the knowledge, we seem to have the technical know-how, we have engineering at our disposal, we have urban theory at our disposal, and yet we fail to create this sense of life and liveliness. And yet historic villages, which is what we are trying to copy, urban centers, which is what we are trying to copy, buzz, which is what we are trying to create, was created by people ignorant of urban design. And so Bill Hillier and Julian Hansen, and I've been lucky enough to be taught by both of them, published a book called The Sociological Space. And this was a seminal work which changed the way we think about space. Up till then rather, space was always considered as the sort of background to human behavior. It was the stage upon which we acted. But what Bill and Julian did was they said, it's not a stage, it's part of the act. Space is an equal member in defining how we engage with each other, in defining how we engage with the cities and buildings around us, how we engage with our families inside our houses, how we engage with our colleagues in office settings. And so space is now not a neutral background. It is part of the power relations, the interactions of capital, of social capital, of means of control. Space is one of those. And so they identified two problems that we need to understand. First problem is, how does society get into space? And I want to ask you a question. How would you behave in these two spaces? Would you be...
So can we suggest an exercise here?
Right.
Can the participants please raise their hands and we can unmute them and you can share how you would behave in these two images?
Great. So image number one is, of course, well, let's not tell you what it is.
Yes. So
can I get a hands up?
Laksha Sharma, you're up. Hello?
Hello.
Laksha, can you hear us?
Okay, all right. Can you hear me, ma'am?
Yes,
Perfect.
So
How
first
would
is
you,
of course a cathedral or a church. So of course
how would you behave?
I would be silent and I would take care of the decorum of the place. And second is a mall or open space where we can move freely and we can have our we can enjoy actually.
Okay, anybody else? Can I suggest a name, or will somebody put their hands up and volunteer?
Oh. Guys, we'd really like your opinions, and let's make this session as interactive as we can.
Right, I'm going to put you all on the spot. Pranjay Gupta, how would you behave in image number
We
1?
actually have a hands up by
Oh, we have got some hands up? Brilliant.
Yes.
Yeah, hi, Sam. And
Hi, Sam.
hi. The first image, it makes me want to stop and take it in, while the wider and the open space at the second makes me want to keep on moving with a lot of people on the in the surrounding me. Yeah.
Perfect, that's great. Can we have one more volunteer, please?
Thank you.
Now we have Sitara Rao.
Hello, Sitara.
Hello, sir. So in the first space, that is the church or the cathedral, I think I would behave more formally and I would be more conscious of the kind of space that I'm in. But in the second picture where it's a mall and there's this huge atrium and things like that, I think it would be more informal and I'm, like the other said, free and on my own and less conscious of myself.
More social.
Yeah, more social, yes.
Perfect. Okay. So now this is the problem of how does society get into space? If you look at them in spatial terms, they are both large open spaces. They are tall. They have clear story lighting. They are generally in light colors. They are bright spaces. They are imposing spaces. And yet one speaks to us of silence, of decorum, of stopping, considering ourselves, being conscious of ourselves in the presence of something bigger than us. It gives us a formality. You can't just walk up to the end of the church. There is a processional, there is a process by which you leave your worldly self behind and you move yourself closer and closer to God. But a similar architectural, it's a different visual language, but if you consider the space in terms of light, in terms of scale, it suddenly asks us, it certainly tells us to do different things. We're not going to be decorous or formal or contemplative in the second image. We're going to be free, we're going to be social, we're going to be hanging out with our mates, we're going to be walking into shops, chatting, swinging our arms. So what is it about space that makes us do different things? So we behave differently in different spaces. This knowledge of how to behave is encoded in space. It is not something that you have a rule book where you read it. It's something that you read it from the space itself. And we can read this information, this spatial information, very, very well. We would behave with the same person differently if they came to our house. If we met them, say, a professor, you would behave differently if you met the professor in college. You would behave differently if you met the professor in a mall or on a street, and differently if you invited that person home. And all of us are able to read these cues to behavior which are encoded in space. And in fact, Bill actually described this as the DNA. It's a information retrieval system. It's a system where knowledge is embedded in our built environment. And as we walk through our built environment, we read different things and we behave differently. And our brains are finely tuned to understand this, but it is very, very difficult to talk about it. So let's see how this happens at a very, very basic level. Here is a single unit. Let's say it's a single cell. It's an open field with nothing for miles around, and one farmer decides to build a shed in the middle of the field, right? We can design the walls to do that, and the roof and the floor slab. But what it does is it defines an in and an out. It defines a domain of X and a domain of Y. It defines ownership. It defines what rules are at play within that ownership. Imagine you're all driving on the highway and you see a police jockey. It's a one cell building. Do you change your behavior? Do you slow down? Do you check around you to see where there are, what the speed limit is? Are you just below it? Do you quickly check to make sure you're wearing your mask in these days? We change our behavior depending on who controls different parts of space. But also what space does, or that, sorry, not space, what that one object does is it suddenly starts to modulate movement. We cannot now walk wherever we want. We have to make a choice, left or right. And that choice of left or right, is what governs how we move and how we behave in buildings and in cities. And so we can see that the socio-cultural dimension, society, culture, economics, all of these are human artifacts, cultural artifacts. It is present in the fundamental form of any object, even something as simple as a single-celled object. So even a single-celled building is what we call a social transformation of space. It is not just putting a building there. We are changing the social rules of how people behave. But buildings are really single cell. Often we see buildings like this, which is, as you can see, very interesting. We can read certain things about it. And what are we doing? We are differentiating spaces internally to create a layout, i.e., we are differentiating activities. So we can see that there is a master suite and a study here, which seems to be near the entrance. So the master of the house can quickly access his car, quickly come in and out, and nobody else needs to know about it. And yet the focus of the house seems to be a home theater, a kitchen, an activity room, a dining room, and a living room. Oh, there's also a games room here. So we can quickly look at this layout and all of us would be able to say, yes, this is a house, which is a party house. So we are very good at reading plans. We are good at being able to look at this plan and understand how this layout modulates certain types of behaviors and modulates different activities. And so what this layout does is it represents a model, a cultural model of how these activities are realized in space. Let me try and put it this way. Most of us in India, if we are asked to draw a house, would assume that the kitchen is for cooking in. And we would put it slightly to the edge of the house, A, for ventilation, and B, because often it's not us really cooking in there. We may have a cook, or we may have somebody who's going to prepare our meals. The dining room is the area where food magically appears. But if you look at a British house, the kitchen has the dining table in it. The kitchen is where you all sit to when you come home from work and come home from college or school. That's where you sit with your computer. That's where you sit with your book. The kitchen is what we would call the family lounge. And so different cultures have different relationships between the acts of eating, cooking, entertaining, being a family, sleeping, using the bathroom. For Indians, a bathroom is a very, very private space. It sits in the most isolated corner of a house. In other cultures, the bathroom is in the hall. It's the first thing you see when you enter the house. Going to the bathroom is not such a private space. Your bedroom is very, very private, but not the bathroom. And so architects and designers, and when I say architects, I include planners, urban designers, all of us who are involved in the built environment. We intuitively conceptualize this set of relationships, and we realize these complex relations in space when we create a layout. So if you're given a design brief to design for a holiday home in the hills, you will intuitively conceptualize what that lifestyle might be like, what the complex relations between different activities would be like, and you would realize it in the form of a layout. But if I tell you to design a 3-bedroom house for an accountant in an apartment, it would be a very different layout. And so we intuitively can do this. But remember I said it's very difficult for us to talk about things? We've got a few more questions for you. How do we describe space? So could you describe some of these in a word or two? Arunima, you're going to have to do hands up again.
Hello. Hi guys, can we see a few raise of hands? Or you can also send us a text on chat box and we can unmute you. One word for the image we have right here. Okay guys, we are sort of, Prachi Sharma. Can we unmute you, Prachi Sharma, so that you can share your opinions?
Yes, actually, I said breakfast because of the perspective. See, the focus of the view is on the breakfast area, na? That's why I said. Otherwise, it's a kitchen. We can see that.
Can we have Pooja Rale next?
Okay, I think the space is more of a transparent space without the obstruction of activities. Like even if you are sitting in the living room, you can see a person in the kitchen, and it's just amalgamation of space without having barriers in between.
Thank you, Pooja and Prachi. Can we have Sitara? Speak up, please.
A kitchen and a breakfast counter is what I said.
Thank you. So can we see the screen again, please?
Hello, you can, but I just got disconnected and I've reconnected myself and I can stream it. Yes, perfect. Sorry. We got breakfast.
Can we have Nazneen? Can we have Alok, please?
Yeah, hi. So looking at this, I can think of peaceful conversation, soothing experience. Like I want something peaceful, like, kind of dim light where I don't have to, like think so much. I can just feel myself and like just relax. Yeah.
Thank you, Alu. Can we have Divya Bharaj? Divya Bharaj, would you like to speak up, please?
Yes. Is it for the second image? Wanted to know. Hello.
Hello. Could you please speak up? Your voice is a little.
Yeah. So, in the first image, what I was able to understand was that it looked like an open space, which kind of invited discussions and conversations.
Okay. What about the second one?
So, it's sort of a.
Hello.
Hello.
Yes, please.
Yeah, hello.
In case there's some technical issues, you can also write your answers in the chat box.
Okay. I'm sorry. I think I had a bit of a technical issue. One device is not letting me put my mic on. So that's the one I was using.
So I've actually made you a co-host. You rejoined again.
Okay. Yeah.
The
So
reason.
let me just try that once again.
It's perfect. There we are. That's perfect. Right. So can you hear me? Perfect. So second one, how would you describe it? Is it an easy thing to do? I think we're getting a bit short of time, so I might go a bit quick on this bit. So generally, we describe spaces according to their geometry. We describe their materiality, their functionality. Most of the descriptions we've got are descriptions of what the space does, sense of light or air. For a plan, most of us would describe this plan as sort of you enter, there's a study on the left, there's a guest room, the study on the right, there's a guest room on the left, the master suite is tucked into a corner on the right, then you come out into this games and eating area. So what we are doing is we are describing a sequence of experiences, a sequence of activities as we penetrate from the outside to the inside. We also could describe something about lifestyle. But when we try and describe something like this, would we use the same language? Would we describe geometry, light and air, the colors, the materiality? Probably. But if you're trying to describe this, we start to get a little more, it starts to become a little more difficult. We often talk about the fabric and we try to describe its texture, its regularity, its grittiness. We might describe a city as radial or linear. We might talk about the grain size. Again, what are we doing? We are describing the geometry, the materiality, the functionality, sense of light, maybe a sequence or lifestyle as we did before. But can we describe why is it that in the image one, this space is suited to restaurants? Why is it that there's only 4 people walking there and not 400? What is it about this space that makes it active or not active? What makes it a good place, or what gives it the potential for being a lovely sort of foodie nightlife street? And the answer to that is in the second diagram. It is something about the way that these buildings are put together. It is something about the way that, again, when we describe the buildings, we are describing the black bits. what we really need to understand is that we need to be able to describe the white bits. And we often don't have the language to describe in great detail what these are. And often we just call them organic, or we call them unplanned, or we call them haphazard. If we are really horrid, we call them illegal. These are not according to formal planning. But even this has some sort of structure. And how do we understand this structure? And how do we describe this set of complex relations between objects in a city or in a space? And is spoken language or natural language adequate to describe these things? I mean, English has the ability to talk about in front of, behind, to the left of, to the right of, in between, beyond. We can describe 3 objects, not more. We don't have the language to describe how 6 objects talk to each other. How are we going to describe a city with 17,000 lines, or 3 million buildings, or 20 million buildings? So we need a new language of space. And what is this language? And that language is what we call configuration, the language of space. Again, absolutely, Rohan, location of the street with respect to every other place nearby could be a factor. But what about its location to every other space that's not necessarily nearby? And that's what we're going to study, look at rather. So again, let's look at these 4 layouts. They're all square, they're all 3 by 3, they all have one larger space. Geometrically, they're almost identical except for the last one, where the larger courtyardy space has shifted from the bottom to the top. I think you'll agree that the position of the doors are slightly different. But to try and describe how different are they, that's a much more tricky thing. We probably need so much language, you could probably write a chapter on it. But if we invert it, and instead of looking at the walls as the foreground, if we look at the space left over as a background, we start to see that there is something more different about these things. The first one seems to have most things linked to the center. Number 4 and 8 are tending off to one side. The second one, everything is connected to the center. The third one seems to have everything connected to everything else. And the fourth one is a little more difficult to describe. But we could describe them like this. The first one looks like a bush from the outside. The second one looks like a benzene ring. The third one is very, very loopy. And the fourth one is something like a tree. And so if we look at space as these nodes, and we look at how spaces are connected to each other, we find 2 types of properties. The first one is the property of the node, which is its immediate property. How many other nodes is it linked to? Is it a dead-end node? Is it a through node? Is it a distributor? Or is it a loopy? Is it a loop? You know, that's a dead end. That could be a through node. That could be a distributor. And all of these are on loops. And so each designer, each culture, each building, each city says, what do I do with my dead end space? Do I put it in a bedroom? Do I utilize it for a toilet? Do I use it for a kitchen? And we make these decisions based on our cultural predispositions or the culture for which we are designing. And what we do as architects is actually, we design this graph. This is what we as architects are doing. We are actually designing the graph. And then we put functions on this graph to suit our needs. And so we need to understand the properties of the graph. Not just the properties of the node, but the properties of the entire graph put together. And we just describe the shape like bushiness or a benzene ring. And space syntax talks about 2 other measures. One is a measure of depth. How deep is that system? How deep is each point from everywhere else? How far do we have to travel to get from each point to all the other points? So a measure of depth and its inverse, a measure of shallowness, is what we call integration. And another measure is a measure of thoroughfareness. If we wanted to travel from all points to all other points, what are the most likely routes that we would take? What are the shortest distance routes we can take? And this brings to light something about what we would call the choice network. It describes the thoroughfareness or highwayness of a city, whereas depth or integration describes the sort of destinationness of each space. And so how do we do this? Step one, we have to divide our space up into discrete elements. And we describe each of these elements as the node, the circle. Then we have to connect them. So wherever two bits of space connect to each other, we connect them with a link or an edge. And then we can develop various measures of choice, integration. There's a bunch of different things that we can measure. And then we visualize these measures back onto the map to give us an understanding of space. So simple technique, let's do it. Here we are. Here's a layout. Okay, so Grand Salle is a formal room. Vestibule is obviously a lobby. A couloir is the corridor there. This is the Salle Commune, which is the common room. The laverie is the washroom. The laiterie is where you make milk and you store milk. The débarras is a storeroom, and there's another vestibule. And we have the salle, which is the main bedroom, and the bureau, which is the sort of private office of the family that lives here. So how would we do step one, which is make it into discrete elements? We would do that. We would put a circle on every space and a circle with a cross for the outside. This is just our convention. You can do anything that you want. You can use squares, you can use triangles, you can color it up. And then we join them up based on where the door is. And as you can see from the outside, you can get to the vestibule from here, and you can go around from the back and also get into the vestibule from there. Similarly, you can get to this other vestibule from here, and you can also go around the back and walk into the Salle Commune from there, right? So there are many connections from the outside to the inside of the house. So if we remove the house, this is our graph. This is the underlying spatial network that has been designed into this house. And from here, we can pick up one point and we can make a graph which looks like this. Or if we pick up the outside, it may look like this. Or we pick up the Salle Commune and it looks like that. Now, can you see that these are three different graphs for the same house? It's not a different house. And what you have to recognize is that this house not only looks different from different spaces, it behaves differently from different spaces. Your experience of a house from the point of view of the toilet in the corner is different than if you experience the house from the view of the family lounge. So how do we measure? I'm going to try and show you one measure, which is a measure of depth. So the first one is maximum depth. It's very easy to see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The furthest point is 5 steps away from the outside, from the Grand Salle. From the outside, it's only 4 steps away. And from the Salle Commune, the furthest space is only 3 steps away. Easy numbers. Then we measure something called total depth, which is how many steps do I need to take to go to all the different spaces. So I need to take 1 step to go to the first room. I need to take 2 steps to go to 2 rooms here, the outside. Then I need to take 3 steps to go to 3 rooms, 4 steps to go to another 3 rooms, and 5 steps to go to the furthest room. And if we total this up, this graph has what we call a total depth of 31 steps to get from the Grand Salle to all the other rooms. Similarly, if we want to go from the outside to all the rooms, we only have to take 21 steps. Or from the Salle commune, we only need 18 steps. What this is saying is the whole house needs more journeys to access from the Grand Salle, which means the Grand Salle is further away from all the other parts of the house, while the Salle commune is closest to all other parts of the house. And so we can measure closeness or depth. The inverse of depth is closeness in a simple way like this. We can quickly do a mean depth, so we can compare different houses. This house has 11 spaces, so we don't count the one that we're starting from. So divide by 10, we may have another house that we want to compare, and that may have 12 rooms. And so by simply doing mean depth, we're able to compare two houses with different numbers of rooms. And if we invert this, we get what's called integration. Okay, it's a little bit more complicated, but on the whole, it is just the inversion of mean depth. And so we can say that the Grand Salle has the lowest integration value of 0.32, whereas the Salle commune has the highest integration. It's the best integrated into the house with a value of 0.55. And we put our house back and we can color it up with the values for each room. And what we see is that the Salle commune is the integration core. It's the center of the house. It's a spatial center and the social center. Pranjay, okay. Because the question I have just received is, why do we need to do it from different places and not just the entrance? The point is that if we can describe it from the entrance, but the house does not behave only from the outside. It behaves from each space. And only when we do this graph for each room, we are able to make this picture of how each room compares to each other room. Okay, so the Salle commune is the most integrated. The Grand Salle is the least, the formal living room where your visitors come. And the most private is the office. So here are three houses from the similar area. Geometrically, they're quite different. One is linear, one is L-shaped, one is rectangular. But if we do this process, we come up with three diagrams like this. And in all these three diagrams, the Salle commune is the spatial center and therefore the social center of the house. And the bureau, the private room, is always the most isolated. It tells us something about this culture. It tells us how culture is embedded in the house form. And so, even though the geometry is different, there is evidence of culture manifesting in the spatial layout. And so, we can understand what we call a culturally variable spatial meaning to the idea of function. And so, going back, we need to divvy up space into different bits. So, we've just done this one where we made a room into a space. We can also make it as lines, and we can also make it as visual fields. And if we do this, we get three different types of analysis. We've just done this one where we see a convex analysis and each room is defined as one space. If we look at visual fields, what you can see from each point of view, we can get a visual graph like this. Now, this was very, very useful because this was a museum and there was intended to be an extension of the museum. And by understanding the integration of the space with visual analysis, the designers were able to introduce a new door here and a new door here to make this the primary connection between the old building and the new extension, along with the door here. And so they were able to integrate, and one here, and they were able to integrate the three main passages of the existing museum into the new museum. And here's the third one, axial analysis. This is a map of Chandigarh and surroundings. If we try to draw a series of lines, which is a series of movement, we're able to look at structures of city, something like this. Okay, so we can do all of this, and unfortunately this is a webinar and I can't explain how each of them is done. That's for the sort of workshop next month. So we can still look at what space can tell us. What can it tell us about cities and buildings? One of the things it can tell us is that most cities have lots and lots of short lines. And often these short lines are at right angles to each other, but they have very, very few long lines. And mostly these long lines are at acute angles. For example, that one leading to that one, leading to that one leading to that one, leading to that one. But the short lines can be at right angles like this. We also see that the long lines generally create a path through the city, path through the system. Here's Tokyo. And what these long lines connecting, sort of creating paths through the system, what they do is they link the edge of the system to the center, which means we can see that there's a lot of yellow along the edge of the system, which is closer to the center than this bit of blue. This bit of blue is further away from the center than this. Okay, this bit of yellow is closer to the center than this bit of green. And so this is what the structure of the city does. It links the edge to the center. It makes cities more compact. We often describe this as a deformed wheel. And this system
So you muted, unfortunately. So we can't hear you. So we can't hear you, unfortunately. You're muted. So can you hear us? So? So we can't hear you. Hi, please give us 2 minutes while
All right, can you hear me?
Oh, perfect. We can hear you now, sir.
Right. Right, we're all can see the screen? Perfect. And you can all hear me. Right, so what does space tell us? It tells us something about the structure of the city. Short lines, right angles, lots of them. Long lines, very few, mostly at acute angles. The long lines create a path through the system, and often, as well as linking the edge of the city to the center, making cities compact, making it possible for large numbers of people to live around in a city and easily access the spatial centers. And this is what we would call the central business district. This is what we call the foreground structure. This is where economic and social activity generally happens. And mainly residential activity then happens on what we call the background structure, the rest of it, mainly residential. Not saying that there are no shops here, but generally the levels of activity are much lower, and this is where you get your quiet spaces. Right? Here are 3 different cities: Den Haag in the Netherlands, Shiraz, and Manchester. And so we can see that even cities from around the world all have this sort of movement economy, this foreground network. which links the edge of the city through to the center, which is something universal about all cities. It's something universal about the human condition. But when you look at the rest of the structure in between this, we find huge differences. Shiraz seems to be much more sort of difficult to navigate, much shorter lines, much more uh, labyrinthine. And that reflects the idea that the center of the mohalla, the center of the settlement, of the smaller settlements in between, are more private, and it's going to be difficult to get in there. Whereas Den Haag is all about straight lines, getting to the center very quickly. Manchester is somewhere in between. You can get to the center quickly, but you still have pockets which are more private. And so these are the socio-cultural differences between different communities and countries. This is the first correlates between measured pedestrian movement and integration, and the second one measured vehicular movement and integration. And this was the first time that space syntax moved from being a sort of academic research tool trying to understand the language of space to suddenly becoming something which could measure gross human behaviors quite accurately. The first one was able to explain 72%, 72.6% of pedestrian movement using that London map. And the second graph was able to measure 91% of vehicular movement based on that graph. And so suddenly from an academic tool, this becomes a predictive tool. We can predict what's going to happen. We can look at our map, we can take 100 readings across the city, and we can verify which spatial value it's best suited to. And then we can now predict the rest of the million lines in the city from only 100 observations. And with a few measurements, it's able to understand a huge deal about the city. Relation, say, between space and movement, relation with built use, real estate valuation, with safety, with navigation systems, predicting growth patterns, future footfalls, a whole bunch of things suddenly opens up by saying, we have verified our model with how the city actually works. We are able to give a scientific, evidence-based recommendation on if you change this road, you will change, this would be your future footfall. And there's a lot more. Okay, so last slide is about spatial structure. We understand that space syntax can now measure, not just measure, it can also, it can measure the structure of space, it can measure what is the foreground, what is the background, how strongly something is foreground, how strongly something is background. And spatial structure, we've seen, can directly predict or can directly be correlated with movement patterns. How many people would use it? What is the net? You remember we talked about even a single cell modulates movement around it. Imagine what that network of space does. We are being able to measure the possibility, the probability of a space being a natural destination or a natural thoroughfare. And so individuals may choose, oh, I prefer that route to this route. But somebody else may prefer a different route because it's cleaner. One may prefer a longer route because it's quicker. So our definitions of distance may change. Distance could be money spent, it could, or petrol usage, or pollution incurred. It could be time spent. It could be number of turns. How difficult is it to navigate? These are all different definitions of distance, and we can actually measure these different definitions in our model. We can look at the network in terms of metric distance and various other things. So what I'm trying to get at is spatial structure is a very strong tool to understand movement patterns. And it is a very strong tool to understand building functionality, because building functionality accrues to differential movement patterns. High movement means high commercial, economic, cultural activities. Low movement means generally residential. And we know that building patterns and movement patterns and building uses affect each other. But the critical point here is neither movement patterns nor building use can change the spatial structure. If we decide one day not to use a street, that does not change the fact that the street exists. If we change a shopping mall into a residence or a residence into shopping mall, we may change the movement pattern, but we don't change the spatial structure. And so spatial structure provides the underlying set of potentials that affect the way buildings and cities behave. If we first understand them, identify them, describe them, and then we align our design to these underlying potentials, we are able to facilitate successful and appropriate solutions. And these solutions are aligned to what I would call the least cost movement network. And as such, we call this spatial sustainability. And this spatial sustainability is the central point from which we can achieve economic sustainability, social sustainability, and environmental sustainability. So it is this nexus of place, this nexus of understanding that places, spaces, they have their own rules. They are part of the game. They are not just the background and we can put a mall wherever we want. They are the underlying reason why things happen the way they happen. And when we understand this, we can build that network back together and actually get sustainability in its entirety. I think, Arunima, I think that's all we have time for right now.
So we actually do have a Q&A section.
Okay, so I can quickly show you, here are some things, a master plan which is aligned to networks, proposals which you can do a before and after, or an option 1 and an option 2, and you can define how things are going to change the way cities are. You can define the zones which are going to become active, define the real estate value, define the economic benefits as well as the social. An area of Dwarka where suddenly the city network didn't achieve it, and by making certain connections you can show how you can activate or increase the potentials. This is a food court where you can look at movement patterns and how people would use it to ensure that you get privacy for eating and get your stalls in the right place. There's an office network, which interestingly, doing a network like this, we were able to put our CEO team right in the center of the office and increase their efficiency like 100%. And that's it. Arunima, over to you.
Yes, sir. So I'll share my screen for the Q&A section.
Perfect. I'll stop my share here.
Yes, please. Yes. So this is the first question that we have. How does space syntax help in slowing down the ongoing global land crisis?
Well, you first have to try and understand what is this global land crisis. Who asked this question?
So unfortunately, we did not get a name for this.
Okay. So if I'm assuming that you're talking about the competition for land, which is all parties responsible, all parties interested in development of whatever, whether it's a state or the private sector, are all sort of trying to capture the same bits of land. The first question is, why are they all after the same bit of land? And I think space syntax can help identify which those bits of land are. Simply because we can do this modeling and we can try and identify which is the highest levels, which are the second level, what is the third level. We can actually measure the entire range of potentials. And we can, I would think, and actually I've done some work on this, trying to do a sustainable master plan. And I've sort of suggested that we need to put a cap on how much land is going to be given for excessive development. We cannot have a city which is uniformly highly developed. We need to have the quiet spaces as well. So depending on how much energy, water, storage we have to be able to distribute this evenly. And I think space syntax can help in identifying where these are. And I think we can then investigate different ways of master planning and legal and policy uh, systems to actually decide how and who gets to use these critical areas. And that is what defines each city. A mercantile city will have a different priority to a religious city. A city which believes very firmly in equality would have a different response to one that believes in majoritarianism. So these are things that we can investigate, and space syntax can help with it.
So we actually have a very interesting question in the chat box by Edgar. I'm unmuting him so that he can ask the question personally to you.
Okay.
Hello, Edgar. Can you hear us?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Hi, Mr. Amit. My name is Edgar.
Yeah, hi.
It's been a wonderful presentation you've been giving. I've just been wondering one question. We know that cities can be measured physically, but then there have been researchers who are into measuring cities virtually and coming up with this idea of the virtual city. For example, like rather than a physical school, we now have online schools expanding from one county to another country, a space that could only be measured virtually somehow. So relating to the subject, are there any possibilities that space syntax could be related to in planning the virtual city? If yes or no, maybe why?
Okay. The answer is both yes and no. Unfortunately, all good questions have complicated answers.
Okay.
The yes answer is that what space syntax is doing is using graph theory mathematics to try and understand certain characteristics of, or rather network theory mathematics, to try to understand how networks of space behave. And therefore the research in space syntax has gone in to look at how does these network properties of space, how do they affect social and economic and cultural behavior of human behavior. All of them is one. So I suspect that yes, the same network mathematics could be used to measure and understand virtual networks. So I'm sure Facebook is doing similar things to try and find out who is the most who is a trend setter because they have more connections, and how many connections do their connections have. So you're using the same sort of mathematics to be able to, you can use it for a virtual networks. And my no answer is, Isaac Asimov has described communities like this where we are uniformly distributed across a planet's surface. We are not clustered in settlements, we are uniformly distributed. Each human being has his 10 square kilometers of land, and they only communicate to each other virtually. The only time that two humans have to actually meet is when they need to procreate. Great sci-fi story. But the reality is that we do not exist in evenly distributed across the face of the planet. We do not exist in dispersed communities. We exist in communities. And one of the space syntax theories on this is like the theory of evolution. Cities and settlements have evolved to bring people close together, to do two things. One is to reinforce existing behavioral net patterns, and this happens in small communities. But also the point of city, the point of having people who don't know each other living in close proximity, is that they are able to create new types of interactions. You go to Connaught Place or you go to your city center and you meet somebody you haven't met ever in your life before. If that meeting is beneficial, you will continue it and it will start to become part of your daily life. And so the nature of cities, the nature of physical interactions is what creates the opportunity for entrepreneurship, which creates the possibility for creativity. And that's something that I feel virtual systems do not have that capacity to the same degree. And so that's my no answer.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
We actually had very good questions, but unfortunately we might have to skip a few because we're running short on time. So we'll just take
Pooja, it's absolutely critical. I think all schools should have this. I think you should be learning sustainability from year one, not something that you add to your thesis in final year. You should be doing sustainable design from your personal space onwards. Even if your understanding of sustainability is very limited in personal space, every design decision has to be related to the larger picture of sustainability. Next question.
That's it. And now, so we'll be talking a little bit about the workshop that
Okay.
he's with us.
So I will be doing a workshop on this. I think it's on the 2nd of November for a week.
Yes, sir.
And what I did today was try and present a sort of larger picture of what space syntax does, how it can connect to the issues that concern us in design and our field today. And a sort of overview of what can be done. As a workshop, it's going to be an intensive, I think, 20-hour workshop over many days, over a week. And we are actually going to be looking into how to do it. We're going to be looking into the software that can do it. And we want to be sort of empowering all the people who attend the workshop to actually be able to do this in their own designs themselves. Make a model, analyze it, understand it, make recommendations, and actually apply it in their own designs and research. So that's what our workshop is going to be about. Over to you.
Yes, sir. First of all, thank you so much, because space syntax is actually quite a complex topic to comprehend, but you've made it very easy for us, and we'd really like to thank you for that. And just quickly brushing through the 1:2x workshop's principles, we sort of work on 3 principles. First is learn in the most interactive way possible, connect with like-minded people, and create your own projects and work on your own projects. And so we actually have Intalks episode every week, so stay tuned, and we hope to see you next week as well.